Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to. Thank you for taking your time and doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
My name is Carolina. I'm a psychologist from Moldova. I'm studying to become a psychotherapist here. Under the terms, what is a psychotherapist here in Moldova? I finished my bachelor and my master's in psychology, my bachelor in general psychology, and my master's as a practicing psychotherapist. And now I'm doing my specialization in psychodrama therapy.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or traditions that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
So Moldova is in the east side of Europe. It's a small country, really small. Like we have a small population as well. Around 4 million people, I would say, like officially, but it's less. And as for holidays, which are specifically ours, will be like our Language Day, our Independence Day, which are celebrated at the end of summer. We have a holiday which is like a national wine holiday, which I don't know if a lot of countries have. We have a lot of tourists coming on this day. Moldova is an Orthodox Christian country, so of course we celebrate Christmas, Easter. Also, like Christmas for us is more like a religious holidays. We celebrate it on the 7th of January. And recently we adopted celebrating it on the 25th, but it's more like a fun holiday. But like the religious one is celebrated still on the 7th with the family, with all the traditions, stuff like this. And for us, New Year is a big thing. I think it's a remaining thing from URSS where they tried to move away from all the religious stuff and they made like the New Year being a big thing. And also we have Merteshor, which is like the first day of spring. And we have these pins we wear, like one side is white and one side is red. It has like a legend behind it, but basically it celebrates like the beginning of spring. As for an emotion, we have actually a word, which is dor. I don't know if it translates in other languages, but it will be like a nostalgic feeling about a beautiful past, a beautiful home, mixed with some sadness in it, like a song about your hometown, something like this.
How did you become a psychotherapist in your country, and what is your therapeutic approach?
I wanted to become a psychologist from grade 8, I guess. I became through a rebellion child. Back then, when I wanted to become a psychologist, my parents were against it because it was not a popular choice. My parents were very worried that I would not have a job. And even if I had one, it would be like very poorly paid. So initially I went to international relationship. I studied for half a year there and I decided no, I moved abroad. And my parents were like, no, please come home. Do whatever you want. And that's when I went to psychology, like for my bachelor. Yeah, so I took like my bachelor's, then I took my master's, and I knew from the start that I would like to work with clients, but I wouldn't like to go into research or like organization or stuff like this. So I knew like my focus will be in that direction. So now I'm in my third step, like my specialization, and I chose psychodrama therapy. In Moldova, we don't have like a lot of schools, but like those specializations for you have to go abroad if you have to study for some. Like we have some in Romania, like for example CBT. A lot of people go to Romania to study that, but I chose this school that I'm with because I liked their approach. They would follow the European standards for how a psychotherapist should behave, the path they should take. So that's why I chose them. One of the founders of the school, she was involved in the making of the drafting of the law for Moldova, because at the moment we don't have a psychology law. I mean, it's drafted. They're like reviewing it. It's supposed to be passed soon. I don't know. I hope There are some things where like we don't know how it will work out, like regarding taxes. It's a big step for us. Like for the last 20 years, it was like a free game for everyone. Like,
what are some favorable profession in Moldova that your parents want you to go?
now I wouldn't know because I'm already past university, but when I was choosing universities, definitely medical school was one of them, like law, accountant, pharmacist.
Okay, so you also mentioned that there is no law yet for psychology and it's a free game from everyone. So can you tell me a little bit about that? How did people use that or abuse that, or do people still follow ethical guidelines? Do you need to be a psychologist to practice, or can you be anything else to practice psychotherapy, for example?
So it's a mixed bunch. Basically, we do have university you could study psychology. When I was studying, you could go and get your master's even though in psychology, even though you didn't get your bachelor in psychology. For me, it was a big pain point because people would come from absolutely different backgrounds, like arts, economy. And one of the things was they would come with really good grades. They would take like the stipends from people who were already in psychology. And it was like a very big pain point for me specifically because I lost like stipend for my first semester for masters because I had like 9.8 and somebody who finished university like 10 years ago had like 10 across the board and she got like a stipend, but like she didn't know anything about psychology. And for me, it was like, how is that possible? Yeah. So basically, yeah, you could go to do your master's in psychology and technically you'll finish school with specialization in psychology. Technically, you could do consultations. Again, some of the schools we have for specialization, they would allow people who don't have a background in psychology, even bachelor's or master's, to be enrolled in the specialization schools. They do specify that at the end of the course, after you do like your thousands of hours, like I don't remember how many thousands of hours there are, you are not like a psychotherapist, you just finished their course, but like people could use this and say like, oh, I finished like these 4 years of specializations, I could start taking clients. A lot of people use like the term coach. Some of them don't even like try to get around, they just call themselves like some form of psychologist, like psychosomatic psychologist. A lot of people do like just courses and then like they promote themselves on Instagram, just plaster the name and they start taking clients. I really don't like this. I mean, I didn't like the part where they at least would go 2 years and get their masters. And yeah, technically when you get your master's in psychology, you have to do like basic courses that you are missing for the previous 3 years. But still, like, it's not the same because there is a lot of overlapping classes. Some teachers would just like require you to do some presentations or like some paperwork, stuff like this, and still it's like, how could you fit like your normal 2 years work where you have to do like your master thesis and then do like the 3 years you missed and like the license thesis as well. So that's my opinion. I know some people do it and some people succeeded to do it well, but I think that's more on the person who succeeded it. And for me, the system shouldn't work like that. It's not that the system works well. It's that this particular person is a fast learner, is invested, put a lot of hours, a lot of work into this, and he or she managed to power through this. Psychology became quite popular in Moldova in the recent years, let's say 5. And a lot of people became suddenly interested in it. But I think it's more like pop psychology. Instagram became a tool where people would talk a lot about psychology, but because of the algorithm and the way it's structured, you are not able to fit a lot of really deep information. And for you to catch people's attention, you have to use like catchy phrases and like generalizations, especially if you are not a trained professional. It becomes a problem. Especially there are people who have like under their belt like 3-4 month courses that start working with other people. Of course, they are not technically psychologists, they are coaches again, but they are coaches in name, but the presentation is as a psychologist or as a psychotherapist. And I think there is like this missing information that you could actually harm somebody. You could actually encounter something that you are not able to deal with.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
It's better now. Again, as I told you, this rise in popularity also has its positive side because people becoming more interested in psychology destigmatized a lot of topics regarding psychology. So people became more willing to go to psychologists and psychotherapists, even though the understanding maybe wasn't super clear what are you gonna do there. So people are more willing now to go, but I feel like there are still a lot of stigma, especially around mental illnesses. There are like the popular one, like depression is quite known, bipolar now is popular. I don't know. I think in all Europe as well, America, there is lack of understanding what mental illnesses really look like outside of TV. There is not a lot of resources for people from not wealthy to say, because going to a psychologist or psychotherapist is quite expensive. In the villages, we have like centers of mental health where people could go, but I don't have a lot of information about them, but I know there are not so many. Let's say in the capital, I know there is a denser population and bigger number of specialists. You can pick and choose, like you can find a psychologist in different price ranges. You can find a psychotherapist. You can find the psychiatric person. You can find like even a coach if that's your thing. Like you can go to a mental center. You can find the group therapy. There are like more resources if you are interested in that. Outside of Chisinau, like it's barren land, let's say. And also schools are not really well equipped in this area. Again, that's from my understanding of the situation, from what I spoke with them. So it's not like my word is not gospel, let's say. It depends a lot on the director of the schools, how invested the director is in this topic. But also number of kids in the schools plays a role. So if a school doesn't meet the quota of the kids enrolled in the school can go without a psychologist. But they'll have like, let's say, a special needs teacher, which will be used as a psychologist, but usually they are not psychologists, or they'll be like overworked. Even though we have like some resources where you can get like free help or help for like a lower price, it's not a lot. It's not as much advertised. People are less educated on this topic. They wouldn't seek this help as much. They still hold a lot of prejudice toward that. Even if they want to seek this help, it could be not ready available because they don't have a specialist in their area. Like they know a specialist because like it's a small village, small town, and like there are a lot of links, and they don't really want to go to somebody that they know, and then they don't have the money to pay somebody from another city to do like online session and stuff like that. That's like the sad part. But on the other side, we have a lot of more people interested on going, a lot of more people actually going, a lot of more people actually enrolling in schools for psychology. When I started school, like we had one Russian and one Romanian group, and we started as 26 people, and only, I think, 10 of us graduated. And then a couple of years later, another university, like a more prestigious one, they had like 4 or 5 groups of psychology students, like first year. And for me, it was like, wow.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether this value of society also influence how you design your interventions as a therapist?
Again, it's mixed. It depends on how old is the client. I guess the younger generation are moving towards more communication, more engagement with children, more understanding that kids are their own people, but they're their own entity. As for the older generation, again, I'm making like broad generalization. If we go to like older parents that have like kids that are adults, I would say it's a more complicated situation, but it stems from complicated historical background where talking about your feelings, talking about with your children wasn't really encouraged, wasn't really a thing, where mental health was never really discussed, where people will often like drink or overwork themselves or just like power through it, or like just say that's life, everybody's sad. And sometimes there could be like, why you are like this? Because I grew up like this and I was fine. Of course, not everybody. But again, we need to understand that this type of communications, it stems from like generational trauma. Most of our grandparents, parents, they come from a generation that they went through war, they went through famine, they went through patient cultural elements of our country were like erased. We have a big debate here in Moldova about our language. Do we speak Moldovan or do we speak Romanian? I would say we speak Romanian because for me, Moldovan was created during the URSSR, where they took like Romanian words but wrote them in Russian letters, and that's how Moldovan was created. Because for me, Moldovan was like specifically created to erase our original language, or like in the big cities, they would bring in people from our regions of the URSSR. They would employ them on the hire. It was mandatory to speak Russian. Local people were pushed to the villages and they were not allowed to perform our customs. And all of this were like pushed out, like the language, the national motifs, the national clothing. So when you take all of this into context, like the deportation, erasure of culture, displacement of local people to the villages, and the Great War, where we were like basically in the middle, there is a lot of history that affected our grandparents, our grandparents, which was transmitted to our parents. And then came the collapse of URSSR, when a lot of people lost money, banditism and crime rose. People became poorer, some people became richer through nefarious means, let's say. It was a big, long period which these people grew in this system. And I understand why they are like this. There is not time to speak about your feelings. There is not time to stay and ponder how did the trauma of my grandmother who went through famine and deportation of her husband affected me as her child, and how I'm transmitting this to my children. Yeah. So of course this does come because when we as the next generation have time to think about this, have time to understand this lack of communication, this lack of emotional understanding that we go through from our parents or grandparents, and we like come to them with some, hey, why are you like this? Because like the parents will be always at fault. They'll feel very hard because, oh my God, I went through all this. And now you're saying to me that I wasn't a good parent or a good grandparent. And then there is this like clash where basically people go in their shells and not willing to talk about this. Some young people continue this trend. Usually in therapy, you don't see people who continue this trend, to be fair. Usually in therapy, you would see people who struggle to break out of and to live differently, and who have problem of communicating with their parents and grandparents, let's say. But there is all of this dynamic. And again, broad generalization.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
Again, here I can answer just from the point of view of how I was taught. Shouldn't be a relationship outside, like that's not allowed. You should have as little interaction in real life as possible. I couldn't take my mother to therapy or like my best friend. That's how I was taught. I wouldn't say like all people follow this rule. Let's say if I had a client and she would refer a friend of her to me, I would say no, because like that's a close connection for me, like it's too close. I don't know if somebody else would say no. General rule, professional, no connection, as little connection as possible.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
No, but again, I was taught, strongly encouraged, for me specifically, to get my certificate at the end. I had to get a specific number of supervision hours to be able to acquire my certificate. That's why I chose my school, because they have this rule in their certification requirement. But as a general rule, again, because we don't have a law, we don't have like a general understanding of what is psychology. No, it depends on the person and how they see psychology and how they feel about following the guidelines.
What are the most common complaints that a client comes to therapy for?
The most I heard, usually communication related or communication with another person, usually in family, like husband, child, mother. Another very common one is like low self-esteem. I put it in quotation because usually we make fun of it a lot at school, because what does it actually mean? It's a lot of things. So another one I would hear a lot, but usually it doesn't lead to sessions. It's how to deal with my child if he does this. Is it normal? Is it not? A lot of questions about kids. What I actually hear in session is like more like communication related and low self-esteem, which usually is like a lot.
And how does clients see you as a psychologist? Do they see you, like authority, or do they see you like equal? How appreciated this profession is in general?
I guess how my clients would see me is like equal, especially because of my age, the way I present. I'm a very laid back person, so I like fun colors. I do a lot of stuff with my hair. I like fashion. So I think it will be hard for them to see me like as very. Secondly, I adhere to like the human-centered approach, where we are working together towards something. I mean, I'm not part of the psychoanalytical school, so I'm studying psychodrama. I guess that's again the thing that stems from the school I'm part of. So like client-centered approach. So yeah, it will be like more equal. But I guess the way I appear, it's a factor as well. I think I'm perceived more seriously when I do trainings, even though I look the same, but maybe I'll throw a blazer. But there people would be like more inclined to look at me like as a specialist, as a somebody who knows more, which, to be fair, makes me quite uncomfortable. But that's like my own issue I need to work through. In general, how people perceive psychologists, again, depends. If a person is open to psychology, usually it'd be like, oh, cool. Can you tell me more? They are very interested, but in a surface level. And then there is like another approach. What do you do there? Just talk? Like, so people pay you to talk? Sometimes there is not an understanding that there is a difference between psychiatry and psychology and psychotherapy, because in Moldova there is a difference between psychiatry, psychotherapy, and psychology. I would say like psychotherapy and psychology are more like a group, and psychiatry is its own thing. Psychiatry is closely related to medicine. If you want to be a psychiatrist, you go and study at the medical school, and only a psychiatrist would prescribe medication. If one of the clients has some symptoms and you think it will be good for them to take some medication or to be seen by a psychiatrist, you would refer them to somebody. Some psychologists or psychotherapists, they work with somebody, like they have like a contact with a private psychiatrist or like somebody from a clinic, but we are not allowed to prescribe medication. Sometimes I get this reaction like, oh, I have so many issues. A psychologist or a psychotherapist will get scared. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. Depends again what attitude the person has towards the psychology. And as I told you, like we're in this transition period where some people understand what it is. Some people have this pop psychology, near astrology thing, kind of religious understanding of psychology. And some people are still like, we don't need it. It doesn't exist. It's all in your head. We lived fine without it for years.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
I'm really into art therapy. Like I'm ride or die for it. I like it. I even did some groups of it when I was working with refugees as well. I think art therapy exercises are like amazing. People don't have to talk to express their feelings. I usually use drawing because I'm a painter as well. I started like from when I was young and I paint till now. Yeah, I really believe in like art therapy. I'm not trained in art therapy. Mostly like I read. I went to some trainings on social art therapy, something like this. I don't remember the name concretely. I still struggle with this, like how do I name these courses, like so, because I don't have like the certificate. But I try to use art as a tool to help people understand their emotion. I saw how much people open up, even people who wouldn't dare say a word about their emotion, people who went through like awful stuff. As I told you, I was working with refugees. It works with children. It works with adults amazingly. And I hate like, but it's grouped. It's used usually it's for children. No, it works with everybody. Teenagers who like usually are the most like, leave me alone. It just like open people up. They don't have to talk. They have to draw, and then you have to ask them something, and it just like they flourish. So that's